Good morning, Mr. Secretary. How are you?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm well. I'm well. Trying to remember a valley.
You're good. Is it?
What's the other big glacier
I don't know.
in the Fitzpatrick there? Yeah, it's sure pretty country up there. Director.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
I think we were supposed to start at 9:15. Is that correct?
That is correct, and it looks like we do have a quorum.
It does look like we have a quorum for the record. I brought Director Nesvik here if there are any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I understand that the treasurer, just for the record, the treasurer will not be able to join us today, but nevertheless, we do have a quorum.
Okay.
We have one item on the Board of Land Commissioners special meeting agenda today, and that is H1, which is to consider 2023 restrictions to the collection of shed antlers and horns on state lands. And just by way of background, the Board of Land Commissioners, as you all know, extends to the public the privilege of using legally accessible state lands for casual recreational day uses unless otherwise closed by the board. Back in October of 2012, the board approved a restriction to the collection of shed antlers and horns on lands under its jurisdiction. Subsequently, it affirmed that with an order of the board on April 10th of 2014. I provided you all with a copy of that order for your information. The board's restrictions were adopted to be consistent with the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission's Chapter 61 rules for collection of shed antlers and horns. Since then, the Game and Fish Commission has twice adopted revised Chapter 61 rules, and at its April 4th, 2021 regular meeting, pursuant to a request from the Game and Fish Department, the board enacted the current order that's in effect with respect to this issue, and that's Board Order 2021-1, which amended the existing restrictions of the collection of shed antlers to be consistent with the Commission's 2020 and 2021 revised rules. Due to the winter conditions this year in Wyoming for 2023, the Game and Fish Commission is adopting Chapter 61 emergency rules, again, to address shed antler collection. The Game and Fish Department has again requested that the board restrict collection of shed antlers and horns to be consistent with their Chapter 61 emergency rules. And so we are recommending that the board approve collection of shed antlers and horns on state lands under the jurisdiction of the board for 2023 by adopting Board Order 2023-1, which is attached to the board matter. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would ask Director Nesvik maybe to provide a little bit of background that led to the emergency rules.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you, Director Scoggins. So as all of you are probably aware, particularly in the western part of the state, central Wyoming, southwest Wyoming, and the far west, it was a particularly severe winter. We had extremely high winter mortality on primarily mule deer and pronghorn. Today, many of those herds remain on their winter ranges, which are typically the locations where they shed their antlers. And so yesterday, the governor signed an emergency rule that extends the opener for folks to be able to go out on public lands. This only applies to basically federal public lands, to be able to go out and collect shed antlers. That emergency rule moved that date to May 15th. This is unprecedented. I've not seen this in my time and in the time that the commission has had the ability to regulate the collection of shed antlers. We certainly are concerned that increased human activity on those places where those animals are at right now would be detrimental to big game, particularly pronghorn and mule deer. And that's why that's why the commission decided to recommend to the governor to do this emergency rule. And that's why we're here today. Obviously, it's important the Game and Fish doesn't regulate activity on state lands, but as Director Scoggin pointed out, this board has in the past aligned the same restrictions on state lands as inconsistent with the Game and Fish rule. And so that's why we're here today. And I certainly would recommend that the board adopt this board action.
Thank you, Director Nesbitt. Thank you, Director Scoggin. I note for the record that Representative Stipp has joined us. With that, I would open it up to members if they have questions, or I would certainly entertain a motion. Are there any?
Mr. Chairman, or just want to make sure, I mean, I assume you might want to say something. Are we going to have public comment after questions, before any motion?
We certainly can have public comment. Let me see if we've got people attending. Let's see, is there, let me just ask, anybody online wanting to address the board? Anybody online? Director, I'm not sure who's hosting the meeting for you, but most of the people that are in the attendee box are look like state folks.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. Ben Bump is running the meeting as per his usual duties as assigned. And I do not know, Ben, do we have any indication that anybody in the participants list wishes to provide comment?
Mr. Chairman, Director, there's 8 people on the attendee list and nobody has a hand raised right now.
Thank you, Mr. Bump. You, Mr. Secretary. Any questions? Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Madam Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and apologies for not having my camera. I'm traveling. Director, can you just let us know, and I know it's impossible to tell the future, but I assume that once these emergency rules are out, then will we look to have permanent rules, or do you foresee that this is just with the upcoming season? And so how do we move forward subsequently after the season?
Director Nesbitt.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Superintendent, we anticipate that after this emergency rule expires, that we will not be enacting this again next year. I mean, we've never seen conditions that we've felt it necessary to go beyond May 1st in the past. So I don't anticipate this becoming a permanent rule.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add one thing to that. You'll notice in your materials that the intention of today's vote is to adopt Board Order 2023-1, and upon the May 16th, that will expire, and the 2021 order of the board will be sort of reinstated until such time that an amendment or it needs to be rescinded. So it's just for this 2023 emergency rules situation that Director Nesbitt talked about.
Further questions? Thank you, Director, for the clarification. Further questions?
Yeah, Governor Gordon, I have a question.
Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. This is for the director. Could you talk a little bit about the process you had to reach this conclusion? Did you go to the commission? what's the process to reach this conclusion amongst the permanent staff and then also the commission itself?
Mr.
Please.
Chairman, Mr. Secretary, I assume you mean this director, Game and Fish.
Yes.
Yeah, so Ms. Secretary, we did evaluations both through visual imaging of snow cover as well as ground observations by Game and Fish personnel. The three Game and Fish regions that are primarily involved in the area where we regulate the collection of shed antlers, which is the Green River, Pinedale, and Jackson regions, all did their own analysis out on the ground to go evaluate where animals are at right now. That we intentionally waited until this past weekend to come to a final recommendation on this to make sure that we weren't overreacting and that animals hadn't had the ability to already move north or move back towards their summer ranges. And so that process or those analyses happened over this last week or so. And then those recommendations went to the president of our commission. That's the first layer of approval required for an emergency regulation. And then it went from the president of the commission to the governor. And that's under the Administrative Procedures Act, what's required for us to initiate and promulgate an emergency rule for 120 days.
Mr. Secretary, just to add to that, Director Nesvik and I had two town halls, one in Pinedale, which we were able to do in person, and then one where we got snowed out of Rollins that Senator Hicks also attended, and Dr. Monteith of the Hobbs School. And we listened to testimony, and there was a lot of concern, not only about shed antlers and collection on in the West, but also about hunting seasons as well. There is a tremendous amount of wildlife impact off of this winter, and a lot of concern. And I don't know, Representative Stiff, if you want to talk about this, but I've been in the western part of the state a couple of times at the opening of antler season, and it is a zoo out there. Everybody running as fast as they can, trying to get antlers. A lot of Utah vehicles that are stacked at trailheads night before. It's actually, there is some consideration about trying to do maybe even a little bit tighter restrictions on it, just because it's not only challenging for the wildlife, but it's also very challenging for people on the ground. There's fist fights and other things as well.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, so the other thing I would add is we did have our regularly scheduled commission meeting last week. It was on Monday and Tuesday of last week. And we heard significant public comment, a lot of public comment about this closure, or about, recommending that the opener be extended to later. There wasn't specificity necessarily on the date, but there was I've heard no, either through formal processes or just personal contacts. I've heard from nobody that said, please don't extend the opener. Everybody has been recommending that we do make this decision.
Yeah, I support that as well. That's our comments here.
And Governor, this is Clark Stiff. Yes, I support what Director Nesvik has said, and what you've said. I think the community here is broadly supportive of doing what we can to protect the mule deer and pronghorn, and the shed antler season does need to be a little more closely regulated. And of course, as you know, the legislature adopted a couple of bills that dealt with that for the next season.
Thank you, Representative. Further comments? If not, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Madam Auditor.
I would move the director's recommendation that the board approve collection of shed antlers and horns on state lands under the jurisdiction of the Wyoming Board of Land Commissioners for the 2023 season by adopting Board Order 2023-1, consistent with Wyoming Statute 362107.
Thank you, Madam Auditor. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Superintendent. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify with an aye. Let me go through that in order. Secretary,
Aye.
Auditor,
Aye.
Superintendent,
Aye.
and I am an aye. That motion carries.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all we have for the special meeting today on the agenda.
Thank you all very much. Representative Stith, thank you. We just had Josh Corsi over here, and he was just explaining it's snowing in your country right now.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Is there support for the auditor's motion?
Second.
Thank you, Superintendent. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays?